Only a few miles from the camp is the Tana River. In the dry season, George reckoned, more and more animals would need to travel to the river, invade the territory of the fish eagle. And they would startle the strange snake bird. The river and its green, lush banks was a potential source of food for all predators, and, with a little improvisation, for George and Terence too. The river provided both water and food. As the inland waterholes turned to grey, muddy crusts, more and more animals would travel to its verdant banks. These would probably become the hunting grounds for our lions, and for those we hadn't as yet seen. The strong-smelling waterbuck and eland that came to drink, and the cool, innocent-looking water itself, were both asset and hidden danger. They were to lead to tragedies we could not possibly have foreseen.
No longer alone now is Christian the lion. He's part of a pride in a small family. But the trials are not over, they're only beginning. Dangers there are before him in his liberty.
As the weeks went by, the lions went off exploring on their own. It was, I suppose, inevitable they would end up where there was most interest, somewhere along the river. Catania, with her short little legs, couldn't possibly keep up. Boy, with his great friend, Christian, stood in the shallow water looking for any movement along the river. Catania was now too far behind to be heard. It was a day George had set aside for repairs. At least a couple of punctures a day was to be expected in this hostile, thorny country. It's not uncommon to end up with more patches than tube. The persistence of Christian's greeting disturbed George. It was unusual for him to return without either Boy or Catania. When neither turned up, George became uneasy. Then, as the minutes passed, he felt alarmed. Christian's behavior was odd. He seemed unsettled, almost as though he wanted George to go with him. George followed the line Christian indicated. It was almost a direct route to the river. Halfway, they were suddenly joined by Boy. There was no sign, however, of Catania. And so, with only a small amount of daylight left, George started to search the area. The next morning, George's searching and tracking had led him to the river. George couldn't tell if the lions had been over to the far bank or not. Christian and Boy could have swum across, but George thought it unlikely that Catania could have made it. There was just one slender hope. Perhaps she'd been frightened and was hiding. For 2 days, George searched and called. Then he sat and watched for any movement that might arrest his growing fears. Then about midday of the 3rd day, he noticed movement on a sandbank downstream. Something was attracting the marabou storks, vultures, and crocodiles. For one terrible moment, he thought it might be the body of little Catania. But the carcass was not that of a young lion cub. It was the mangled remains of a half-eaten impala. Then he saw something that gave him a clue to Catania's possible fate. The imprint of a lion's paw. And close beside it, the unmistakable tracks of crocodiles leading to the water. George could not accept what he now knew in his heart to be true. But who thinks of death as humans do? It seemed, as the lions played, they had already forgotten and accepted the loss. The dice are loaded against cubs, and especially little orphans, right from the start. George would miss Catania, and he felt somehow that Christian and Boy would miss her too.
George tunes in by radio transmitter to Nairobi once a week to order supplies. It's his only contact with the outside world, with the rest of Africa, and he usually hears while waiting his turn what's going on. Just after the loss of Catania, he overheard a conversation about 2 young lionesses that had been trapped in the Maralal area. He resolved he must find out about them. Christian stayed at camp, just took it easy, or tried to.